Connor Bedard looks absolutely defeated. After another embarrassing home loss 5-2, this time versus the Calgary Flames, the Chicago Blackhawks are dead last in the NHL. And it seems to be taking a massive toll on specifically Connor Bedard. So make sure you watch till the end because we're going to be talking about why the Blackhawks have been so bad and why this could be hurting Bedard's development long term. And hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content just like this presented by BetUS. Now heading into the season, there were reasons to believe that Chicago would be better this year and reasons to be optimistic. For one, you had Connor Bedard in his second year and just naturally you had some assumptions that he would get better. Then you have some of the returning players and free agents, guys like Taylor Hall who were injured all throughout last year would be returning and hopefully be healthy. Players on the free agent side like Teuvo Teravainen and Tyler Bertuzzi. On the defense, a bunch of guys like Alex Martinez, TJ Brody to solidify that depth. For me personally, I saw Chicago improving by quite a bit, getting outside of that true dumpster and being more of a respectable team. Not competitive because I didn't see Chicago being close to the playoffs, but being more so a 70-75 point team rather than 52 points last year. Woo. But as you guys can see, that has not been the case. Now, in terms of point production, they're a little bit better than they were last year, I guess, but only by a few points. And they're right now right in the bottom place spot with, in 44 games, just 14 wins and 30 points, even below San Jose, who's had some extraordinarily bad last few weeks. So not only has Chicago really failed to make any progress whatsoever, in some ways it feels like they've regressed just a little bit too, especially when it comes to expectations. I feel like this season for Chicago is a lot more disappointing than the last, just because for the Blackhawks, they were expecting to get at least a little bit better, and that progress has been hard to come by. But hey, what about all those free agents and additions they made in the offseason? Well, there hasn't really been much progress in that end either. Really, the only player you could say is maybe having a better season than the year he had before is Teuvo Teravainen, who, in terms of point totals, has been a little bit better in terms of his pace compared to last season. On pace for 58 points this year and 19 goals. Still, though, hasn't, especially to start out, looked amazing for Chicago. Hasn't really turned anything around for them. But you have a lot of the other additions. Tyler Bertuzzi has not really been all too great, settling around the same point space as last year, but defensively, I think it's taken some major steps back. eLiaminator, I think, has fit pretty well, but even he is not lighting the world on fire or anything. On pace for 26 points, nothing all that great. You'd have Taylor Hall, who's regressing big time, even though he is healthier this year. This isn't really much of a factor shift to shift. Then you have some of the defensive options. Alex Martinez was acquired, but he hasn't really played much this year. TJ Brody has just been fine in a smaller role, but also not all that great. Laurent Brossoit, who we didn't even mention on the goaltending side, was a pretty big addition, over $3 million on its contract with Chicago. He got injured, and he hasn't even played this season. I do think Brossoit would have helped this team a little bit, but again, I don't think by too much. I mean, considering the rest of the free agent additions, having Brossoit still come up to play, I don't know if that would have been the case either. He probably would have shown some aggressions, especially against this Chicago defense. It's a little bit different than what he was dealing with Winnipeg season prior. But the thing to me that was the most important with those free agent additions was finding another winger that could work with Connor Bedard. After last season, we saw Philip Kurashev work quite well, but I think he could have needed some other trigger man to work on that line for him and get him some more confidence in his second NHL season. And I would say for the first couple months of the year, that just was not the case. There was nobody that was really working all that well. But I do think over the last little bit, we have seen this first line of Bertuzzi, Bedard, and Mikheyev have some good synergy. But the problem is that even with that, even though the chemistry has been there, they're just not that great of players in the first place. In Bertuzzi's case, he's on pace for barely 40 points. In Mikheyev's case, he's on pace for what, like 25 points or something? It's not going to put great food on the table, really. And I think in Bedard's case, especially, the fact that he's on the pace that he's at with these type of players is insane. When you look at Bedard and what he's been able to do this year, he's really the only player that I would say on Chicago is still exceeding expectations. I mean, you got players like Ryan Donato, Jason Dickinson, Teuvo Teravainen who have been solid, but they're not playing with Bedard, at least not frequently, and they haven't really been a core part of his tenure with Chicago. In Bedard's case, what he's been able to do with his teammates is insane, and at 19 years old, still pretty crazy considering how bad Chicago is. Of course, the former first overall pick had a pretty good offensive year in his rookie season, 61 points in 68 games, getting the Calder Trophy last year. But look at what he's been able to do this season. In 44 games, he has 12 goals, 27 assists for 39 points, is on pace for 11 more points than what we saw last year. And considering how bad Chicago is, I think that's pretty amazing, in all honesty. The fact that Bedard is able to increase his point production by not just a couple of points, but more than 10 points on this Chicago team with maybe even worse line mates than he had last year is pretty insane. Especially when you consider the drop-off of Philipp Kurashev, because last year, Kurashev and Bedard actually worked out pretty well together. They had some good chemistry going, and points-wise, they worked off each other extremely well and extremely consistently. You can see in 75 games last year, he got 18 goals, 36 assists for 54 points, only a few points shy of Bedard's point totals. So both of those guys, as a pretty good dynamic duo, worked out well in his rookie season. But as you can see, Kurashev has just been a non-option this year for Chicago in all categories. In 31 games, has 3 goals, 5 points, has looked dreadful defensively, and has just taken steps back in every single way. Even though defensively last year he was awful, offensively this year he hasn't had the same impact or speed or consistency, and hasn't been relied upon to be on Bedard's wing since really day one. So get this, Bedard is able to improve his point production by 11 points this year, at least projected, going from a player like Kurashev, who was on pace around 60 points, to a Bertuzzi being his best line mate, who's on pace for around 40. It's kind of ridiculous that Bedard is doing what he's doing right now, and I don't think it's getting enough attention. A lot of people are saying how bad Bedard is, but when you look at the team around him, when you look at what he's actually doing, come on. You look at just how dominant Bedard is compared to the rest of his peers on Chicago, 8 points above Teravainen, who's second place in Blackhawks scoring. But again, it's different compared to last year because he was up there with Kurashev, both of those line mates were right there, but he's not playing with any of those other guys. So the fact that he is leading his line as much as he is, with Bertuzzi only having 22 points in 44 games, is pretty great to see. That, I think, is progress in Bedard's end, and I think there have been times as well, especially to start out the year, where defensively I think he has been improving. But to me, a big turning point in Bedard's play has been the coaching change in Chicago, going from Luke Richardson now to Anders Sørensen. There's been a pretty big change in Bedard's production and his play. And even though you're not really seeing much of a difference in the record or the consistency in winning, one of the most important things for Chicago this year is getting Bedard's development right. And I think under Sørensen, that has been the case. You can see in his last 17 games since the coaching change, he has 6 goals, 13 assists, and 19 points. He has been absolutely unbelievable and doing a lot better than he had done before, especially in the goal scoring department. He has 4 even strength goals too, which is good to see. You want to see more consistency out of his shooting and out of his goal scoring ability. I think we have seen that over the course of these last few weeks. In Bedard's case, I think the confidence is starting to return for him. I think it's getting a little bit better, but at points, I think just he's getting beaten up by just how bad the Chicago team is. Even when Bedard is at his best right now, Chicago still seems to find a way to lose every single time. But these tweets from Ben Pope absolutely crushed me. As he says, Connor Bedard looked defeated, and in Bedard's own words, he says this: "It's really frustrating. We're competitive athletes and we take a lot of pride in our games, our group, as a team, and our fan base. It's been hard. It's been a lot of games to lose. It weighs on you. Yeah, I mean, I just try to find a way out of it, trying to get better every day, but it's hard." He talks about Chicago's current state right now and what didn't click for the Blackhawks. It's been a lot of whacking up the boards or guys not being where guys are expecting to be when they're making a pass. So that ends up making you not have options, and that makes it tough. And that's really does encapsulate what happens there. I mean, we saw that horrible Seth Jones turnover and just a lack of communication and consistency and chemistry with this Blackhawks team, the 3 C's, I guess you can call them. And that's a recipe for disaster. In Bedard's case, I think he's still been playing well, and it looks like he's getting more confidence, but the team around him seems to be getting worse every single day. Which, when you're the Chicago Blackhawks, is extremely hard to do, by the way. But I don't blame Bedard whatsoever for being in a kind of defeatist mood right now, because they have been defeated. The Blackhawks are absolutely out of the question right now, and I don't really have any signs, really, of returning to that this year. All really you can hope for is that Bedard is able to continue to get his confidence up, that some of these younger players continue to play well, and that next year they can be a somewhat semblant competitive team, because right now they are just not even close. But it definitely does worry me, because we compare it to a team like the Sharks, who are kind of in the same position as the Blackhawks were last year, where they're, bringing on a big-time rookie, and the vibes are a little bit higher, and there's reasons for the losing, and it's not that much of a problem. Whereas in Chicago's case, they already have the rookie season of their franchise star, and now it's the second year, wanting improvement, needing change, and that just has not been there. And I worry for Bedard's sake, especially if we'll see that affect his career long term. It's not the most surprising thing that Chicago is back in the bottom 5. I mean, I think it's more likely that Chicago is going to be back in this position rather than actually making the playoffs. But again, I saw improvement there. I saw them being a respectable team at some point and being able to play spoiler, but Chicago just is not that team. They don't have that fight, they don't have that understanding, and they don't have that maturity yet, and that really permeates throughout the entire roster. Now, we're gonna get into why this future for Chicago scares me, especially for Bedard's development, but let's first talk about today's sponsor, BetUS, the place to make your hockey picks, whether it be on daily NHL games. You can also go for the NHL draft, the Four Nations odds, as well as the US leading at plus 160. You can also go for PWHL odds as well. So basically, every single league you can think of, BetUS is the place to make your picks. Just use code YouTube150 when you guys sign up to get a 150% sign-up bonus on your first deposit and 125% sign-up bonus on your next deposits after that. Plus, with BetUS's casino, you can get a 200% sign-up bonus on that as well. When you guys sign up, though, it helps the channel out a ton. And thank you to BetUS for sponsoring today's video, and let's get right back into it. Now, one reason that I am concerned for Bedard and the Blackhawks long term, and this is a trend that I think we're starting to realize a lot over the last couple of years, is that rebuilds are so much harder to get right than they were a decade and a half ago. And this is kind of a trend that we are seeing with a lot of teams right now. Teams that bottom out, trade so much of their roster, completely drain the whole team of valuable assets. When they try to compete again in just a couple of years' time, it rarely works out because the depth isn't there, the leadership isn't there, and the mentality that has been built up before has left the team and going on to greener pastures to win Stanley Cups and to go on to playoff teams. In Chicago's case, they're another team in the 2020s that has been in this rebuilding mode that just has not been able to turn that corner. You look at the standings, and of course, you got Chicago, San Jose, Buffalo, who's been rebuilding forever, still down in the dumpster. Anaheim has not been able to make progress. Really, the only teams that are kind of outliers, as especially recently in that Atlantic division, teams like Ottawa, Detroit, Montreal, that are getting better, still aren't bona fide playoff teams yet. They've been rebuilding forever, especially teams like Ottawa and Detroit. Yet they're just barely now over 500 and scraping for every single point they can get. And especially in those cases, it's taken a long time, way longer than Chicago's been rebuilding, to even get respectable. And that's only really started this season. Especially I look at that Central Division, and wins are especially hard to come by. You got Winnipeg that has solidified itself as a perennial contender. You got Minnesota that has some great players here and there. Dallas isn't going anywhere. Colorado isn't going anywhere. You got teams like Utah, especially, that I think are way farther along in their rebuild than Chicago is right now. And even though I think they could make some improvement next year, is Nashville going to be as bad as they are next season? Is St. Louis going to be improving? There's a lot of questions in that Central Division, and I just think that those wins, those points, are going to be very hard to come by. Even if Chicago improves next season in the roster, are they there yet to even be close to a playoff team? I don't think so. In fact, I think a lot of the teams that are developing more of the Washington Capitals model are having the most success. Washington could have gone in a full-scale rebuild if they really wanted to. If they didn't care about Ovi's record, they could have absolutely done that, especially after the last couple of years and the lack of success there. But they didn't. They kind of retooled that roster. They changed what happened there. They changed some of the coaching systems, and they're now one of the top teams in the NHL. They didn't fully bottom out. They traded some players here and there, but they still wanted to improve and look to improve with some of those younger pieces, and they went full send into the development. And look at what's happened with Washington. They've completely turned the corner. You got teams like Calgary, who also could have gone in a full rebuilding direction, but they're a team that's kind of been in that more retooling area, not fully getting rid of everybody on the roster, but focused on developing and different coaching, and they're a team that has been respectable this season. So I feel like we're seeing a shift in the NHL where more of the retool style is getting the better benefits in the end, rather than the full tank for first overall rebuilds that we're seeing, which I think is pretty different than what we saw in the past. For the 2000s, for the 2010s, the teams that bottom out, the teams that got the best picks, were the teams that became the best. Pittsburgh, Chicago, what they were able to get out of their rebuilds and their tanks and their best picks ultimately led them to Stanley Cups. But we just are not seeing that out of a lot of the teams that are succeeding right now in the NHL, that are at least turning the corner. I think we've seen a lot of teams still that are contenders with their first overall picks that have done well, like Edmonton and Toronto, for example. But I think a team like Toronto, who bottomed out completely and are now teams that are fully playoff teams consistently, they're one of the exceptions, I would say, in recent memory. And I think we're seeing a lot of disappointments, at least over the last few years. What we've learned is teams can't just magically turn that switch and automatically be a good team when they want to be. It takes more patience than that. And you look at what Chicago, where they are right now, and there's still a lot of prospects that are far away, like Oliver Moore, and even a player like Frank Nazar, who's come onto the NHL roster this year, has had some pretty big growing pains. So next year, unless they go after a bunch of top-end players, I don't know how successful Chicago is going to be, especially when you look at that defense, which has had some massive problems. Seth Jones taken a massive step back since his injury. Alex Vlasic has had some poor moments this season after a great season last year. And on the goaltending side, I mean, Peter Mrazek has had some good moments, Oliver Soderblom as well, but the consistency just has not been there. I think the Chicago fate might be a little bit better if they were to have traded for Yaroslav Askarov this last offseason, but what's done is done. That's just not happening. I think for Chicago, they honestly have to kind of preach a more patient build at this point, because I don't think there's any way they're going to be competitive anytime soon. But to me, Connor Bedard deserves better than this. He is somebody that can be a franchise player, and to me, I think deserves a Chicago team that is at least competitive, is at least respectable. He is pulling his own weight. Since the coaching change, he's putting up great numbers for a bad Chicago team, and quite frankly deserves to be on a more respectable system. Considering the rest of Chicago, I could understand why Connor Bedard is frustrated. I absolutely understand why he's down in the dumps right now, because there's really no reason to be happy up to this point. Chicago's been a dumpster fire, but I just hope that Bedard doesn't get too depressed about this, because he is a special player and deserves to have playoffs in the future. We'll see if that ends up happening soon, but I think for Chicago, they're in a bad spot right now and need to figure things out here soon, or else I think in Bedard's case, that mentality, that mood is going to get really distracting. But I'd love to know down below your thoughts on Bedard's season up to this point and his career up to this point as well, and what you think about Chicago and their future right now. Do you think they're still going to be a playoff team? Do you still think they can win a Stanley Cup with Bedard, or do you think there are some major red flags that need to be addressed? I would love to know your thoughts down below on that. And of course, make sure you share the video with all the hockey fans you guys know online. Click that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell if you haven't already, and click on this card for all of my Western Conference talk right in one playlist. Thank you guys for watching the breakdown, and I'll see you guys again. Have a great one, and goodbye. And thank you to BetUS, of course, for sponsoring today's video.